Marry me, or my father dies. The words left Lena Carter's mouth before her courage had time to disappear, hanging in the air of Adrian Romano's office like a challenge no one in their right mind would dare make. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of an expensive wall clock somewhere behind her, each second echoing against polished marble floors and dark mahogany shelves lined with books she doubted anyone actually read. Adrian Romano sat behind a desk large enough to seat 6 people, the afternoon sun from the floor-to-ceiling windows casting long golden lines across the surface. He didn't move. Not a single muscle. Men like Adrian Romano didn't react quickly. They observed first, calculated second, and decided last. Lena could feel the weight of his gaze before she even looked up, the kind of gaze that made most people nervous enough to start apologizing. She forced herself to keep her shoulders straight. Her hands, however, betrayed her. They trembled slightly at her sides, fingers brushing the fabric of the simple navy dress she had bought at a discount store 2 years earlier. In a room where everything probably cost more than her yearly income, she felt painfully out of place, but leaving wasn't an option anymore. Not today. Not when her father had less than a week before the hospital refused to continue treatment without payment. Adrian finally leaned back in his chair, slow and deliberate, his expression unreadable. He looked younger than Lena expected for someone whose name carried so much quiet influence across the city. Early 30s maybe, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it seemed like it had been designed around him. The rumors said he controlled half the private shipping routes along the East Coast. The rumors also said you never wasted his time. You walked into my office, he said calmly, his voice low but clear, and opened with a marriage proposal. His tone wasn't angry. If anything, it sounded almost curious. That was somehow worse. Lena swallowed. It's not what it sounds like. One of Adrian's eyebrows lifted slightly. That would be impressive, considering what it already sounds like. For a moment she considered backing out, pretending she had said the wrong thing, apologizing, leaving before the situation became even more humiliating. But then she pictured her father sitting alone in a hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and plastic tubing, pretending everything would be fine even though both of them knew it wouldn't be. Lena took a slow breath. 1 year, she said. We stay married for 1 year. Adrian's fingers tapped once against the desk, a soft sound in the quiet office. And after that, we go our separate ways. He studied her the way a chess player studies a board halfway through a difficult game. You're serious? Yes. Another pause stretched between them. Outside the tall windows, the skyline of Manhattan glowed in late afternoon sunlight, traffic moving slowly far below like a distant river of steel. Adrian Romano had built his reputation on control, deals measured in millions, negotiations that lasted hours without a single raised voice. Yet now a woman he had never met before stood in his office offering something that made absolutely no sense. Finally, he asked the question Lena had been expecting since the moment she walked through the building's security doors. Why me? Her answer came quietly. Because you're the only man who can save my father. Adrian's eyes narrowed just slightly, the first visible crack in his calm. And you think marrying me is the solution? Lena held his gaze, heart pounding. No, she said. I think it's the price. Adrian Romano did not answer immediately. He remained seated behind the wide mahogany desk, his fingers loosely folded together as if Lena Carter had just offered him a routine business proposal rather than something that defied every rule of logic. For a long moment, he simply studied her. Lena could feel that careful attention moving across every detail, from the worn strap of her leather handbag to the faint crease in her dress, where it had been folded in a small closet. Men like Adrian Romano were known for reading people the way accountants read numbers. Nothing escaped them. Finally he spoke again, his voice still calm, but quieter now. You came here alone. Lena nodded once. Yes. You walked past 3 security checkpoints, 2 reception desks, and an assistant who usually sends people away within 30 seconds. His eyes rested on her face. That means you were very determined. Lena drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. My father is in St. Matthew Medical Center, she said. Room 412. Adrian's expression did not change, but the slight tilt of his head told her he was listening carefully. He needs surgery, Lena continued. The doctors say it has to happen soon. within the next few days. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun drifted lower across the skyline, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Somewhere far below, a car horn echoed faintly through the city streets, but inside the office the silence remained thick and controlled. "And the hospital expects payment," Adrian said. It was not a question. Lena nodded again. $280,000. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, the faintest trace of surprise appearing in his eyes before it disappeared again. "That is a very precise number. It is the number the billing department gave me this morning." She clasped her hands together to stop them from shaking. "If they do not receive confirmation of payment, they will postpone the procedure." Adrian looked at her for another moment before asking the question she had been expecting. "Why come to me?" Lena hesitated. The answer was not simple, but hiding it would only make things worse. "Because the man who controls the hospital's financing works for you." Adrian's fingers tapped lightly against the desk again, once, twice, the quiet rhythm echoing through the office. "Interesting," he said. Lena lifted her chin slightly. "I tried every other option first. Loans, charity funds, insurance appeals. None of it moved fast enough." Adrian's gaze sharpened just a fraction. "And then you decided the logical next step was to propose marriage to a man you have never met." Lena swallowed but did not look away. "I did not say it was logical." That almost earned the smallest hint of a smile, though it vanished before it fully formed. Adrian stood slowly from his chair and walked toward the tall windows overlooking Manhattan. From this height, the city looked quiet and orderly, nothing like the chaotic place Lena had rushed through earlier that morning. He folded his hands behind his back, staring out across the buildings as the sun dipped closer to the horizon. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a new tone, something more thoughtful than before. "Your father," he said, "is Daniel Carter." Lena's heart skipped. "Yes." Adrian turned slightly toward her. "The same Daniel Carter who sued Romano Logistics 12 years ago." Lena felt the old memory tighten in her chest. "Yes." Adrian studied her carefully, the silence stretching once more between them. "That case nearly cost my family a major shipping contract," he said. Lena knew that part of the story. She also knew the other part, the one most newspapers had ignored. "My father believed the company was responsible for unsafe working conditions," she said quietly. Adrian watched her for several seconds. Then he asked the question that mattered more than anything else. "And you believe marrying me will fix all of that?" Lena straightened her shoulders and answered with steady honesty. "No, I believe it will save his life." Adrian Romano remained near the window for several seconds after Lena Carter finished speaking, the fading sunlight outlining his tall silhouette against the glass while the city stretched endlessly below them. From where Lena stood, the entire skyline looked distant and almost peaceful, but inside that office the air still carried the quiet tension of two histories colliding. Adrian finally turned around, his expression thoughtful rather than hostile, though the weight of memory lingered in his eyes. 12 years, he said slowly. That lawsuit lasted nearly 18 months. Lena nodded. She remembered it clearly even though she had been barely out of high school at the time. The headlines had appeared across local newspapers and business journals, often reducing the entire situation to a simple fight between a large corporation and a stubborn mechanic from Brooklyn. But for Lena, it had never been simple. "My father believed he was doing the right thing," she said quietly. Adrian walked back toward his desk, his polished shoes moving across the marble floor with calm, unhurried steps. "Most people who challenge powerful companies believe that," he replied. His tone was not mocking. If anything, it sounded reflective. Lena watched him carefully. "He never wanted money," she said. "He wanted safer working conditions for the dock crews." Adrian stopped beside the desk and rested one hand lightly against its edge. "The case ended in a settlement," he said. Lena nodded again. "Yes." Adrian studied her face, as if measuring the distance between the young woman standing in his office now and the memory of the courtroom battle that had shaped both of their families in different ways. "My father was still running Romano Logistics at that time," he said. "He believed the lawsuit threatened the company's reputation." Lena lowered her gaze briefly before looking back at him. "My father believed someone needed to speak up." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The quiet hum of the building's ventilation system filled the space where their words had stopped, and somewhere outside a helicopter drifted slowly across the skyline. Adrian finally pulled out his chair and sat down again, folding his hands together on the desk, as if preparing to review a complicated contract. "And now," he said calmly, "the daughter of the man who sued my family is asking me for help." Lena did not try to deny it. "Yes." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with curiosity. "You understand why this situation is unusual?" "Yes." "You also understand that people in my position do not usually agree to emotional deals." Lena took a small step closer to the desk, forcing herself to stay steady. "That is why I came with something valuable." Adrian's gaze sharpened. "Marriage. A legal partnership for 1 year," Lena said carefully. "After that, everything returns to normal." Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. "Normal is not a word that usually appears in arrangements like this." Lena clasped her hands together again. "My father gets his surgery. Your reputation remains untouched. And when the year ends, I disappear from your world." Adrian watched her for several seconds without speaking, the silence stretching long enough that Lena could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Finally, he asked quietly, "You would marry a man you consider an enemy?" Lena answered without hesitation, "I would do anything to keep my father alive." Adrian studied her face once more, as if searching for hesitation that never appeared. The determination there was unmistakable. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a new note of interest that had not been there before. "You are either incredibly brave," he said, "or completely reckless." Lena held his gaze. "Maybe both." Adrian rested his elbows lightly on the desk and interlocked his fingers. For the first time since she had entered the office, he looked less like a distant executive and more like a strategist evaluating a move he had not expected. "Tell me something, Lena Carter," he said quietly. "If I say yes, are you prepared for the consequences of stepping into my world?" Adrian Romano did not answer immediately after his question. The office fell into another long silence, the kind that seemed to stretch time itself. Lena Carter stood across from the massive desk, feeling the quiet pressure of his gaze, as if the entire decision rested on a single breath. She had expected this moment. What she had not expected was how calm he appeared, as if her future had already become part of a calculation only he could see. Lena lifted her chin slightly and met his eyes without hesitation. "Yes," she said. Adrian studied her carefully, searching her expression for doubt that never appeared. "You say that very easily," he replied. "But you do not yet understand what my world actually is." Lena did not move. "I understand enough." Adrian leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest while the fading sunlight from the window softened the sharp lines of his face. "Most people who come into my office are looking for business agreements," he said slowly. "Shipping contracts, investment opportunities, partnerships measured in numbers and signatures." His eyes remained fixed on hers. "You are offering something very different." Lena nodded. "Because my problem is different." Adrian tapped his fingers lightly against the arm of the chair, a slow rhythm that suggested he was weighing each possibility. "Marriage," he repeated quietly. "A legal union with my name attached to yours." Lena took a small step closer to the desk. "Only for 1 year." Adrian watched her approach, but did not interrupt. "You pay for my father's surgery," she continued steadily. "You cover the hospital costs and any treatment that follows. In return, I marry you legally. I stay for 12 months, and after that I leave without asking for anything else." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "You make it sound like a rental agreement." Lena allowed the smallest hint of a smile. "It is more honest than pretending it is romantic." That response seemed to interest him. For a moment Adrian looked almost amused, though the expression faded quickly back into the composed calm that defined him. "And what exactly would you do during this year of marriage?" he asked. Lena answered without hesitation. "Whatever is required to make the arrangement believable." Adrian's gaze sharpened again. "Public appearances, events, dinners, business gatherings." "Yes. People will ask questions." "They will." Adrian leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the desk again. "You would be under constant attention." Lena took a slow breath before answering. "That is a small price compared to losing my father." The sincerity in her voice hung quietly between them. Adrian studied her for several seconds before speaking again. "Your confidence is impressive," he said. "But confidence does not prepare someone for the kind of scrutiny that follows my name." Lena remained steady. "Then I will learn quickly." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with growing curiosity. He stood from his chair once more and walked around the desk until he stood only a few feet away from her. From this distance, Lena could see details she had not noticed before. The faint lines of concentration near his eyes, the subtle scent of cedar from his cologne, the calm posture of someone who rarely felt uncertain about anything. "Let me understand something," Adrian said quietly. "You are willing to marry a man whose family once fought yours in court, step into a life you know nothing about, and spend an entire year pretending everything is normal." Lena looked directly into his eyes. "Yes." Adrian watched her for another moment before asking one final question. "And what makes you believe I would agree to something like that?" Lena did not hesitate this time. "Because men like you respect courage," she said. "And I just walked into the most powerful office in this building and asked for something no one else would dare to ask." Adrian Romano did not respond right away after Lena Carter finished speaking. For several seconds, he simply stood there, close enough that she could hear the faint sound of traffic drifting up from the streets far below the building. The silence between them no longer felt hostile. Instead, it carried the quiet weight of a decision forming slowly in his mind. Adrian studied her face carefully, as if he were looking for the exact point where confidence ended and fear began. What he found instead was determination that had not moved even slightly since she first entered the office. Finally, he let out a small breath and stepped back toward the desk. "You are correct about one thing," he said calmly. Lena waited. "Courage does get my attention." Adrian walked around the desk and sat down again, his movements controlled and deliberate. He reached for a thin silver pen resting near the edge of the polished surface and turned it slowly between his fingers while thinking. Lena remained standing where she was, her hands still clasped together to keep them steady. "However," Adrian continued after a moment, "courage alone does not convince me to enter into legally binding arrangements." Lena nodded slightly. "I expected that." Adrian lifted his eyes toward her again. "Did you?" Lena allowed herself a small breath before answering. "Men in your position do not make emotional decisions." Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, the pen still turning slowly between his fingers. "Correct." The late afternoon sunlight had dimmed into the softer glow of early evening, casting long shadows across the office floor. The skyline outside the windows was beginning to shimmer with the first lights of the city turning on one by one. Adrian glanced briefly toward the window before returning his attention to her. "But there is something about this situation that interests me," he said thoughtfully. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken slightly. "What is that?" Adrian placed the pen back on the desk. "You came here with complete honesty." Lena blinked, surprised. "Honesty?" "Yes." His tone remained calm. "Most people who want something from me try to disguise their motives. They flatter, negotiate, exaggerate." His gaze remained steady on hers. "You did none of those things." Lena did not know how to respond to that, so she simply waited. Adrian rested his forearms on the desk and interlocked his fingers. "Instead, you walked into my office and offered a transaction that benefits only one side." Lena shook her head gently. "It benefits both sides." Adrian raised one eyebrow. "Explain." Lena took a careful breath before answering. "Your name would be connected to someone outside your usual world." Adrian listened. "Someone ordinary." Lena continued steadily. "A marriage that looks real instead of strategic. People trust stories like that." Adrian's expression shifted slightly as he considered her words. "You believe my public image would benefit from appearing human." Lena hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes." Adrian leaned back again, the faintest trace of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. "That is a bold observation." Lena met his gaze calmly. "You asked for honesty." Adrian allowed the small smile to fade as he returned to thinking. The room grew quiet again, the only sound the faint hum of the city outside. Finally, Adrian reached for the small phone resting on the corner of his desk. He pressed a single button. "Sophia," he said evenly when the line connected. "Please delay my next meeting by 15 minutes." He ended the call before Lena could process what that meant. Then he looked back at her. "It appears," Adrian said slowly, "that this conversation may take longer than expected." Lena felt a cautious wave of hope rise inside her chest, but forced herself to remain calm. Adrian watched her carefully for another moment before speaking again. "Tell me something, Lena Carter." She nodded. "Yes." Adrian's voice remained steady but carried a subtle shift of interest that had not been there before. "If I agree to this arrangement," he said, "are you prepared to follow the rules that come with it?" Adrian Romano's question lingered in the quiet office like the final move in a chess match that had not yet finished. Lena Carter stood across from the desk, feeling the shift in the air. The conversation had crossed an invisible line. This was no longer a hypothetical discussion. Adrian was considering the possibility seriously. Lena answered without hesitation. "Yes." Adrian observed her carefully. "You have not heard the rules yet." Lena nodded once. "Then tell me." Adrian leaned back in his chair again, studying her with the calm patience of someone accustomed to controlling every situation around him. The city outside had grown darker now, the evening lights reflecting against the glass windows while the office lighting cast a warmer glow across the polished desk between them. "The first rule," Adrian said slowly, "is that this arrangement will appear completely real to the outside world." Lena listened carefully. "There will be no indication that our marriage is temporary," he continued. "To the public, to my business partners, and to the press, this will look exactly like a normal relationship." Lena nodded. "I understand." Adrian raised a finger slightly. "You will attend events with me. Charity galas. Corporate dinners. Occasional travel, if necessary." Lena remained calm. "That was part of the agreement I already accepted." Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly, impressed by her steady response. "The second rule," he continued, "is discretion. Anything you see or hear within my world stays private." Lena answered without pause. "That will not be a problem." Adrian studied her again, measuring the sincerity in her voice. After a moment, he continued. "The third rule is simpler." Lena waited. Adrian folded his hands together on the desk. "You do not interfere with my business decisions." Lena allowed herself a small breath of relief. "I never planned to." Adrian gave a small nod. "Good." A quiet moment followed as he considered the final piece of the conversation. Lena watched him carefully, sensing that the decision itself was approaching. Adrian finally stood from his chair once more and walked slowly toward the window, looking out across the glowing Manhattan skyline. From this height, the city looked endless, millions of lives moving independently beneath them. After a few seconds, he spoke again. "You said your father is in room 412. Lena's heart tightened slightly. "Yes." Adrian remained facing the window. "St. Matthew Medical Center." "Yes." He nodded once, almost to himself. "The hospital board receives significant investment from one of my companies." Lena had suspected that much, but hearing it confirmed still made the situation feel surreal. Adrian turned around and faced her again. The calm certainty in his expression had returned, the look of someone who had finally reached a conclusion. "The surgery your father needs will be approved immediately," he said. Lena felt the words hit her like a sudden wave of relief, so strong she had to steady her breathing. Adrian continued before she could respond. "The hospital will receive payment tonight." For the first time since she entered the office, Lena's composure almost broke. She pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to show just how much those words meant. Adrian noticed, but said nothing about it. Instead, he walked back to the desk and rested his hand lightly on its edge. "In exchange," he said calmly, "you will become my wife." Lena looked directly at him, her voice quiet but steady. "For 1 year." Adrian held her gaze for a moment before answering. "For 1 year." The agreement hung between them like a contract already written. Adrian then added one final sentence, his voice calm but unmistakably serious. "Once this begins, Lena Carter, there will be no turning back until the year is finished." The office remained quiet for several seconds after Adrian Romano spoke those final words. Lena Carter felt the weight of the agreement settle into reality, heavier than anything she had imagined when she first walked into the building earlier that afternoon. A few hours ago, the idea had sounded almost impossible. Now it was simply a decision already made. Adrian watched her carefully, studying the way she absorbed the moment. Most people, when confronted with something this life-changing, reacted with excitement or fear. Lena did neither. Instead, she stood calmly, her shoulders steady, her eyes clear. That composure interested him more than anything else she had said during the conversation. Finally, Lena spoke. "Then we should begin." Adrian tilted his head slightly, almost amused by her practicality. "You move quickly." Lena allowed herself a small breath. "My father does not have the luxury of time." Adrian nodded once, accepting the truth of that statement. He reached toward the desk again and pressed a button on the phone beside him. Sophia, he said evenly when the line connected. Please ask Daniel from legal to come to my office immediately. A pause followed before he added, and clear the rest of my evening schedule. He ended the call without further explanation. Lena listened quietly, realizing how effortlessly Adrian rearranged the world around him. A decision had been made, and the entire structure of his company moved to support it without question. Adrian stood again and walked toward a cabinet built seamlessly into the wall beside the bookshelves. He opened one of the doors and removed 2 crystal glasses along with a bottle of sparkling water. Without asking, he filled both glasses and set one on the desk in front of Lena. You should sit, he said calmly. Lena hesitated for a moment before lowering herself into the chair across from him. The seat felt softer than anything she had ever owned, the kind of quiet luxury that existed in a different world from the small apartment where she had grown up. Adrian returned to his chair and slid the glass toward her. Drink. Lena accepted the glass and took a small sip, the cool water steadying her breathing. Adrian watched her carefully, as if confirming that she was still certain about what they had agreed to. Legal contracts will take a few hours to prepare, he said. My team will handle the paperwork. Lena nodded. What happens after that? Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. After that, we make the announcement. Lena blinked once. Tonight. Adrian's tone remained calm. News travels quickly in this city. It is better to control the story rather than allow speculation. Lena considered that for a moment. People will be surprised. Adrian allowed the faintest hint of a smile. That is one way to describe it. Outside the windows, the sky had darkened fully now, Manhattan glowing with thousands of lights that stretched toward the horizon. Adrian followed her gaze briefly before speaking again. There will be a ceremony later this week, he said. Small and private. Lena nodded slowly, processing the reality of what her life was about to become. Adrian watched her quietly for another moment before asking one final question, not as a test this time, but as confirmation. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Lena placed the glass back on the desk and looked directly at him. My father will receive his surgery tonight. Adrian gave a single nod. Lena continued calmly. Then yes. The answer hung in the quiet office, simple and unwavering. Adrian Romano studied her face for a few seconds longer before responding with quiet certainty. Very well, he said. Welcome to my world, Lena Carter. Daniel from legal arrived exactly 12 minutes later. Lena Carter heard the quiet knock on the office door before Adrian Romano calmly said, Come in. The man who stepped inside looked to be in his early 40s, dressed in a dark suit and carrying a thin leather folder under his arm. His expression showed the practiced neutrality of someone used to handling unusual requests without asking unnecessary questions. Still, when his eyes moved from Adrian to Lena, a brief flicker of surprise crossed his face before it disappeared again. Adrian gestured toward the chair beside Lena. Daniel, please sit. Daniel obeyed without hesitation, placing the folder carefully on the desk before opening it. You asked for legal preparation, he said calmly. Adrian nodded once. Yes, we are drafting a marriage contract. Daniel's pen paused for the smallest fraction of a second above the page. Lena noticed it, but Adrian continued speaking as if nothing unusual had been said. The agreement will last 12 months, Adrian said. Full legal marriage status beginning this week. Daniel glanced once toward Lena, then back at Adrian. Wish included in the agreement? He asked. Adrian looked toward Lena before answering. Yes. Standard privacy clauses. Nothing excessive. Lena met his gaze and nodded slightly. Adrian then continued. Public disclosure will occur tonight. A formal ceremony will take place later this week. Daniel finished writing and closed the folder for a moment, clearly organizing the information in his mind. I will have a preliminary contract ready within 2 hours, he said. Adrian nodded once. Good. Daniel stood and gathered his folder again. Before leaving, he gave Lena a polite nod, the gesture professional but respectful. The door closed quietly behind him, returning the office to the calm silence it had held all evening. Lena released a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Adrian noticed. This is moving quickly, he said. Lena nodded. Yes. Adrian stood again and walked toward the window, looking out across the glowing skyline of Manhattan. Traffic flowed steadily along the streets far below, the endless rhythm of the city continuing as if nothing extraordinary had just happened in the office above it. By tomorrow morning, Adrian said thoughtfully, every major business journal in the city will know my name is connected to yours. Lena joined him near the window, though she kept a respectful distance. I suppose that will surprise people. Adrian allowed the faintest smile. Surprise is useful sometimes. Lena looked out across the lights of the city, realizing how dramatically her life had shifted in only a few hours. Earlier that day, she had been sitting beside her father's hospital bed listening to the quiet beeping of medical monitors. Now she was standing beside one of the most powerful men in Manhattan, preparing to become his wife. Adrian turned slightly toward her again. You should go see your father tonight, he said. Lena blinked in surprise. Tonight? Adrian nodded. The hospital will confirm payment within the hour. His doctors will schedule the procedure immediately. Office. For a moment she leaned back against the polished metal wall, allowing herself to breathe in slowly. The past few hours felt unreal, like a series of decisions made by someone braver than she remembered being that morning. Yet the reality remained simple. Her father's surgery would happen because of the agreement she had just made. The elevator descended smoothly through the building, passing floor after floor of offices where people were still working under bright lights, unaware that one conversation upstairs had changed the course of two lives. When the doors opened in the lobby, the atmosphere felt completely different from when she had first arrived earlier that afternoon. The marble floor gleamed under the soft lighting, and a few late evening employees moved quietly through the space, carrying briefcases and laptops. Lena stepped outside into the cool Manhattan night. The city air felt sharp against her skin, filled with the distant sound of traffic and the glow of streetlights stretching down the avenues. For a moment, she simply stood there, watching the constant motion of the city that never seemed to pause. While a few visitors sat quietly in the waiting area, Lena headed toward the elevator that led to the fourth floor, her heart beating a little faster with every step. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Soft lighting, still sharp in his eyes. You spoke to someone important, he said slowly. Lena hesitated only briefly before answering. Yes. Daniel leaned back against the pillow again, his gaze thoughtful. I know that look, he said softly. The evening grew deeper outside the windows. Daniel Carter eventually drifted into a light sleep, the exhaustion of the day settling over him, while the monitor beside his bed continued its calm, steady rhythm. Lena sat there holding his hand for several minutes, watching the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. For the first time in days she allowed herself to relax, knowing that the surgery was finally scheduled and the constant uncertainty that had haunted them was beginning to fade. Carefully she stood from the chair and adjusted the blanket near his shoulder, the small gesture automatic after years of caring for him in quiet ways. The hallway outside the room was nearly empty when she stepped out, the soft lights casting a peaceful glow along the polished floor. A few nurses moved quietly between patient rooms while the distant sound of a rolling medical cart echoed faintly from the far end of the corridor. Lena walked slowly toward the window at the end of the hall, looking out across the city. From this height, Manhattan stretched endlessly into the night, the skyline glowing with thousands of lights. Somewhere out there, Adrian Romano was still working inside his towering office building, arranging legal documents and business announcements that would reshape both of their lives by morning. The thought still felt surreal. Earlier that afternoon, she had been searching for any possible solution to save her father. Now she had agreed to marry one of the most powerful men in the city. Lena folded her arms lightly against the cool glass of the window and let out a quiet breath. The decision had been made quickly, but not carelessly. She had walked into Adrian's office with complete honesty, and he had responded with the same direct clarity. There had been no deception between them, only an agreement built on necessity and mutual understanding. Still, the reality of what awaited her began to settle in. Public attention, business gatherings, a year living inside a world that operated by entirely different rules. Lena was not frightened by the idea, but she understood it would require strength she had never needed before. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand, pulling her from her thoughts. When she looked down at the screen, she saw a message from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. The message was short and direct. Ready to prepare you for the procedure, he said calmly. Daniel nodded once, accepting the news with the quiet strength Lena had always admired. All right. Lena stood beside the bed as the nurses began their careful routine, checking monitors and preparing the paperwork needed before surgery. The room filled with the soft movement of professional efficiency, each person performing their task with calm confidence. The doctor turned toward Lena for a moment. Everything has been arranged, he said kindly. You can wait in the family lounge while we complete the procedure. It should take a few hours. Lena nodded, grateful for the reassurance. Thank you. Daniel reached for her hand before the nurses moved the bed. Lena, he said softly. She squeezed his hand gently. I will be right here. Daniel gave a small nod and allowed the staff to begin guiding the bed toward the hallway. Lena followed them as far as the elevator that led to the surgical floor, watching quietly as the doors closed and the medical team disappeared from view. The corridor suddenly felt very quiet again. Lena walked slowly toward the waiting area and sat down near the large window overlooking the city. Morning traffic had already begun filling the streets below, the endless movement of Manhattan continuing as it always did. She held her phone loosely in her hand, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. The agreement with Adrian Romano no longer felt distant or theoretical. It had already changed the reality of her father's future. Her phone vibrated softly against her palm. Lena looked down and saw another message from the same number as the night before. The message was simple. The announcement will be released at noon today. Lena read the words carefully before typing a reply. I understand. A moment passed before another message appeared on the screen. My driver will bring you to Romano Tower after the surgery is finished. Lena lowered the phone slowly and looked back out the window at the brightening city skyline. The next step of her new life had already begun, and there was no turning back now. The hours passed slowly in the hospital waiting area as Lena Carter sat near the large window overlooking the bright midday streets of Manhattan. The city moved with its usual unstoppable rhythm, while inside the hospital time seemed to stretch into quiet moments of waiting and reflection. Doctors and nurses moved in and out of nearby rooms, speaking softly with families and checking their schedules as the day unfolded. Lena had been watching the clock on the wall without realizing it, measuring each passing minute since the surgical team had taken her father upstairs. She held her phone loosely in her hands, replaying the events of the last 24 hours in her mind. Everything had happened so quickly that it still felt unreal. One conversation inside Adrian Romano's office had shifted the direction of her entire life. The agreement they had made had been clear, direct, and almost businesslike, yet its consequences were anything but simple. Lena knew that by the end of the day her name would appear beside his across news outlets and business reports throughout the city. The thought did not frighten her, but it carried a quiet weight that settled deeper with every passing hour. Finally, the door at the far end of the waiting area opened, and the same doctor who had spoken to them earlier stepped inside. Lena stood immediately. The doctor smiled warmly as he approached. Miss Carter, he said calmly. The procedure went very well. Lena felt the tension leave her shoulders in a rush of relief she had been holding back all morning. He is stable, the doctor continued, and we expect a smooth recovery. Lena nodded quickly, emotion rising in her chest as the words settled in. Thank you, she said softly. You can see him shortly once he is moved back to his room, the doctor added before heading down the corridor toward his next patient. Lena remained standing for a moment, letting the reality of the news fully sink in. Her father was safe. The decision she had made had given him another chance. A few minutes later, a nurse guided her back to the familiar hospital room where Daniel Carter rested comfortably, still waking from the effects of the procedure, but clearly stable. Lena sat beside the bed again and held his hand gently as he opened his eyes. You did it, he said quietly. Lena smiled softly. The doctors did. Daniel studied her face for a moment, the same thoughtful look he had worn the night before. Whoever helped you, he said slowly. They must believe in you very much. Lena did not answer right away. She simply squeezed his hand and let the moment remain peaceful. Her phone vibrated softly again in her pocket. When she checked the screen, she saw a new message from Adrian Romano. The announcement has been released. Lena opened the news notification that appeared beneath the message. The headline was already spreading across multiple outlets. Adrian Romano announces unexpected engagement.